Thanks for clicking on the video. Today I'm going to show you how I took this XT250 engine and turned it into this. It's going to be a full disassembly and then a reassembly, along with all the torque and specs to reassemble it. The video is split into three categories: a step-by-step disassembly, step-by-step build of the bottom end, and then a step-by-step build of the top end, all of which have been time-stamped in the timeline. So let's get started. This video will also include a lot of technical aspects of how big the pistons are, what torque settings you'll need for what nuts where relevant. So yeah, just enjoy the video and let me know what you think. I won't be talking throughout the disassembly, but I'll come back on the mic for the top end and bottom end rebuild and just explain what I'm doing a little bit. But for this part, I'll just let this run. So we'll see you in the bottom end rebuild. The last thing I'm going to mention just before I go off is that the XT and the TT engines from 1980 to 1983 are very identical. So you can use this video for a TT250 from 1980 to 1983, with the exception, I believe, of the head components, like the cams and stuff. I think they're slightly different, and the clutch basket. But you could use this as like an indication of how it was built. So it might help you, it might not help you, but I'll let you get back to the video now. For the bottom end rebuild, so firstly I will make another video later on how I painted those cases. I heat cured them. I used the VHT paint and it's actually come up really nice, which you'll see at the end, which makes it resistant to fuel and stuff like that, so it won't wear. But for now I'm just going to put all the parts out and just have a look at what we're dealing with. So the first thing I'm going to do is, because I don't have a crank puller, I'm going to put the crankcase in the oven just to heat it up, and I'm also going to put the crankshaft in the freezer. So then the bearing's just going to slide in, because I had a lot of trouble putting it together because it's such a tight fit and I don't have the puller tool. So heating one, freezing the other made it slide in straight away. Then I'm going to put in the transmission. Pretty self-explanatory. Just put it in the holes where it needs to go. I didn't take mine apart, which made it a lot easier when I put it back in to reassemble. Now the pin on the right, it's super important to note that you want this end with the two circlip slots to be upwards, because you're going to bolt on things to that later. Now I unfortunately didn't put it upwards and then I had to pull the whole thing apart, but go back to there and just make sure that those two circlips are facing up and out of the engine, and that'll save you a lot of time. After that we put the balancer in, which is on the top right of the transmission, and now we're just putting some engine gasket down before we put the other crank cover back on. But I can't stress enough, make sure that pin has the circlips facing upwards, because that's where you're going to bolt your oil pump onto. Otherwise you have to pull the whole thing apart, which was not fun. From here, just sliding on the case, nothing too special about that, and I'm gonna give it a light tap with a hammer. Now the reason why I say light tap is with things like this, if you can't get it down completely, most likely something is jammed. So you don't want to hit it too hard, otherwise if there's a rod that's jammed, it'll punch through and break your case. So I was giving it light taps with the hammer. Now we're just going to put the screws in to bolt the crankcases together. As you saw earlier, I already had one screw in, just made it easier to stand it upright so I could show you on the camera. But just put all the screws in and that'll bolt the crankcase together. And you would torque these to 14.5 foot-pounds of torque. Now we're going to put the shift cam in, and it's important to note that that one little rod that's sliding in and out that you can see there, that actually inserts into the engine, so that's how you're going to orientate it. But that's the shift cam, and that's the first part of the transmission we'll put in. And now I'm just testing, that's obviously changing the gear, so I was just testing if I could feel the gear change. Next I'm going to put the stopper lever on, and you can see you can't really see the little lever. I'll zoom in a second, but you want to press down on your finger, which is what I'm doing with my right hand, and push in with your left hand. And the reason why is that needs to sit against the shift cam, and I'm going to zoom in very shortly now and that'll make a lot of sense. So you want the stopper lever to be at the very back of the shift cam. There, as you can see there, it's just sitting against it. That's where you want it to be, and that's why I was pushing down, because it'll try and recoil back up. Next thing we're going to put in is the shift lever 2, and we just want to align the teeth marks as it is there. You'll see two little dots on the end of the levers, and you want those two to just match up. Now we're going to put the Kickstarter mechanism in, so just slide it in, and then you want to twist it clockwise until it catches, and then keep twisting it clockwise to put tension on the spring, just like I did then, and then it will just lock in. From there, here I just want to show you there's obviously a lot of gears on there, so I've skipped ahead a little bit, but I missed a circlip at the start. So right there I put a washer, gear, washer, then circlip, but you want to put a circlip, washer, gear, washer, circlip. So just go back and have a look at that if you'd like, but circlip goes first. Now we're going to put the oil pump in. So we put the rotor in. I'm just going to put it with a little bit of oil in there, just so that first fire up. You'll see me throughout this video putting oil on things, so when I first kick it over, hopefully it'll not burn itself out. But yeah, just bolt it on from there. I'm going to use an impact wrench just to make sure that it's in tight. There's no torque specs for it, but I always feel more confident with an impact wrench. As such, impact driver, sorry. Again, now I've skipped and I forgot to put this bracket on the balancer the first time. Make sure you put this on before you put the balancer. You start to bolt the balancer up like I am right now. So as you can see, there's no bracket there that I've put on, but make sure that you put that on first and avoid what I did. Then you'll start putting your washers on. And then you want to take note of that dot. That's what you're going to line up to the primary gear from the crankcase very shortly, which I'll show you. But just take note of that dot and put this on for now. And just put it on hand tight for now, because you're going to have to lift gears and make it slide in with the primary gear very shortly. So as you can see here, here's the other dot. You want that to line up with the dot on the balancer. So again, that's why I'm not torquing it down just yet, because you're going to have to like lift these up and down to make them move with each other. And the reason for that is that the balancer will actually hit the crank if they're not aligned. So you want this to be aligned. You'll see right there, I'm just aligning the dots, and then that's the end result you want to achieve. Just make sure they line up and you've got it perfectly aligned. Now, torque specs are on the screen, but that pink rag between the balancer and the primary gear, that's just how I'm locking it up to actually apply the torque. I know there's a tool for it, I just don't have that yet, but you can put a rag in between the two gears and there will be no damage to the engine as you're torquing it up. Again, just applying more oil for when the engine first starts, just to make sure that it doesn't burn out. Next thing, on the balancer gear, you just want to hammer that washer against the nut just to make sure that it doesn't slip when it's running. And this is the pin where you put that circlip on that I showed you at the very start that you want facing up. So circlip, washer, gear, and this is the one that drives the oil pump when you're in idle. So the clutch basket will have a cog at the bottom that'll drive this little oil pump, and then that drives that yellow cog, which then will drive oil throughout the engine, which means that it's got oil while it's in idle. Put the clutch basket on. You might have to wriggle it around a little bit just to get all the gears to slot in, and then you just put the necessary washers and nuts on. Then put the basket in the holder, and then the nut. From there, just get the clutch basket holder, and the nut will be to that setting on the screen. So you might need to just hold the engine just to get it to work. And then you want for the clutch component, you want a rod and a ball bearing in there. And then I'm just going to oil up all these plates just so they're not stuck together. I know a lot of people like to soak them in oil, but I just didn't have the container for that at this time, so I just thought oil will do for now. But make sure when you put it together, at least it's oiled or lubricated in some way. That's an important point. Whether you soak it or just put it on, it's totally up to you. And you want the basket and the clutch holder arrows to match up. So you'll see two little arrows there. You want the arrow on top of arrow just like this, and that means that it's in the right position. Next is just to put the gasket on, and then note, you'll see a little circle here in a second. Yep, there. Make sure you get your decompression lever in. That's super important before you put this case on. And then from here, I'm just torquing at 3 separate points, so then I can apply even pressure as I go down. So yeah, top left, to the right, and to the bottom, and then I'll start to torque it down one by one after that. But I like to always put opposing sides on at the start, so then I know that it's coming down with even pressure. And when it has even pressure, it most likely won't leak oil. That's the main thing. Then you got to put your oil filter in and then the cover on. And again, if you want to see this, how I've painted this, and this is oil, fuel resistant and heat resistant, and I had to bake it in a little oven. I'm going to put out another video maybe next week on this, so just subscribe if you like it, and then you'll see the video pop up next time. Now we're assembling the decompression lever. So you want to make sure that little spring is sitting against the lever in the engine and that it flicks back, because that opens up the exhaust port. And if that's open, you're going to lose a lot of your compression and power. So you always want to make sure that flicks back. Now we're just aligning the cam guide. So this nut at the bottom actually stops the cam guide from sitting too low. So this guide will actually sit on top of that bolt. And then this bolt from the side just kind of locks it into place. And you'll see when you put it together that it's got a flat part. Then just put that spacer over the gear shifter, and now we're going to put the clutch in. And this is meant to be torqued at 8.7 foot-pounds, but you know, I'm just going to use the impact driver for this one. I've never really had a problem with clutch bolts being torqued. Just putting the sprocket on now to get close to the bottom end finish, just to make sure everything on the bottom end is done properly. Putting in the neutral sensor. It's a 14mm kind of bolt that sits into it. And just before I put on the electricals, you want to make sure you have the chain in. So just have it sitting to the side for now on the sprocket, and now I'm going to put in the stator. So this one isn't really adjustable. There's just two holes where it's going to screw into, so it's pretty simple to just put in. Just put the screw in the hole. No adjustment really needed on this end. Just make sure that everything's tight on the timing part that I'm tightening up now. And then the magneto cover, again, just align it up and then hand tighten the bolt, because we'll tighten that when we do the top end, when everything's together. Now for the top end rebuild. So for this one, I got a new piston because mine was pretty beat. I only needed to get a 75mm piston. The barrel wasn't actually that worn, so luckily I didn't have to bore it out or anything like that. But yes, 75 is standard for an XT 250. And just take note of here, I'm putting in little washers and barrels that into the head nuts. That's where the oil is going to flow up and down, so just take note of that, because you'll need those in there. And again, I'm just putting more oil on for things, so when it gets put together it has oil. I'm putting the O-ring over the barrel, again just for oil not to leak out. And I know a lot of people like to use gasket goo at the bottom of the barrel. I've done that as well on this one, because I had some stubborn old gaskets that I could barely get off, so I had to scratch it off a little bit. So just to make sure that it's dead flat and doesn't leak, I've put on some gasket goo here. I'd recommend throwing the chain in the engine, just because it can get in the way when you're trying to put this down, which you would have seen me do. And then yeah, just put it down and then we'll start to screw everything on. Here I'm just going to put the cam guide back in. Now you'll see this table here. This is where the torque specs for these bolts are. Now I'm assuming that this is a 6mm hex bolt, So I'm going to torque it to the 6mm hex bolt. First by hand and then, torque it from there. But it's not super clear on what bolts are torqued for these components, but that's where the assumption I'm going to have is. I'm just going to give it a quick test that it actually turns over smoothly and nothing's stopping it. And here we are. I'm torquing that first 6mm bolt to 5.1 foot-pounds of torque. As you can see in the background, I've got the laptop there because I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing any of these guides or washers that go through the head, because it's super important you need all of these, because it's going to leak oil or the oil won't make it to the top of the head and everything will seize. Putting the head gasket on. So this is the gasket that connects the head and the barrel together. And I've got a zip tie on the end of that chain because it just gives me a little bit of extra leverage when I'm trying to pull it up and keep it out of the engine, because from here it's a lot harder to get it out of the engine. And now the head bolt's pretty self-explanatory. Again, I'm going to do one side and diagonal, so then I can just apply pressure evenly, so then there's no gaps, ideally, because if you do all one side, it could pivot up and open up the other end. You want to make sure that the decompression lever holder is on the exhaust side on the left, where the spark plug is, because that's what's going to hold the decompression cable. Next, put the cam in. So you'll see me just put the bolt in so I can give it a light tap with a hammer. Torque up the head bolts. Now this little cam holder, you want to be careful with these bolts, because I actually dropped one of these 10mm and it went right into the engine. Luckily, there's no oil in it, so I just lifted it upside down and it fell out. But maybe just put a rag there if you're worried about dropping the bolt in the engine. But yeah, this will push against the valve, and I'm just tightening it up with a torque wrench just because it was the tool I had on hand at that time. I didn't have another ratchet. There's no torque specs for that specifically. Now I'm going to put the cam sprocket in and then we're going to time it. So you want this T to align with that little dot on the side of the engine, and then you want to align that with the marking on the cam, that straight line, and the little pointer out on the outside case. And if they're aligned, you're good to go. And then from there, we're just going to put the cam chain tensioner in and then tighten the cam sprocket. And these are these 8mm head bolts, and I'll show you how to torque those later. Cam tensioner needs to be torqued to 5.8 foot-pounds, but you also want to make sure there's a slight bit of movement in the cam chain, maybe like 1 or 2mm, just to make sure it's not too tight. And now this is where we're going to torque the magneto before and the cam head, to the torque specs on the screen. But we didn't do it earlier because it's easier once everything's together to torque it up. And these head nuts here, these are the ones I'm assuming are 8mm. And I'll put there it is, the 15.5 foot-pounds. And if you pause there, you'll see why I'm giving these torque measurements. Now we're just going to put the intake manifold. So you want the little lip at the top to face up. So then that's what the carburetor is going to sit against. So I'm just removing a bit of tape from the painting, but I'm going to put the decompression lever in now. Again, you just want to align the washer and the spring to make sure that it recoils, and then you're going to put it in with the bolt at the end, which you'll see me do shortly. But yeah, everything must reflex back, so that spring needs to be in. While I'm here, I'm going to just adjust the valves. I've put the measurements on the screen. This one's the exhaust valve, so I'm going to close it and then open it to the point where I can still feel it dragging on the top of it. And I think I've used a 0.14 millimeter for the exhaust, because it says go from 0.12 to 0.17, so I just went somewhere in the middle to allow for any kind of tolerance, like 1 mil up or down, or 0.1 mil up or down. And then I just bolt the exhaust valve cover up. From here, there's a 10mm bolt that needs to be put in, and it has a brass washer on it. I don't actually know what that's for, but I know oil will shoot out of it if we don't put it on, so it's enough of an incentive to put it on. And then from here, I'm just going to adjust the other one. Sorry, this is the intake valve. And this one actually had a flathead screw at the top, so it made it very easy. So once I got the right height, I could just hold the screwdriver and then twist the nut, which you'll see in the next video. So yeah, just so I don't twist the actual screw, I'm holding that tight with the screwdriver and then twisting the nut to make sure that it's in tight. Then I'm just going to put the cover back on. And this one's super simple, just putting the cam cover back on. Again, I really liked how this paint came out, so if you like it as well, subscribe so then you can see the video come out next week or the week after. And I'll show you how I went through the baking process and using the primer, how long to let it dry, how many coats to use. And from here, I recommend putting the decompression lever on. Just take the decompression lever off at the bottom end, and then you can slide that cable in a lot easier. And then, yeah, hook up the cable, adjust it that there's 1 to 3 mil worth of play. And then I'm also going to test it here with the Kickstarter. So I'm just going to give it a little movement just to check that both ends are actually moving, and then that they return back. And that's super important. So if it doesn't return back, that exhaust valve is open, and then you're going to lose a lot of power. And yeah, that's how I went through this engine and rebuilt it. So if you liked it, let me know. Yeah, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it so I can improve for the next video. Thanks for watching.